Sri Lankan cricket culture is different than other places, right? There's a need for outliers, for freaks, for geniuses, for completely original players that have never existed before. Like, it's a part of their identity, right? Like, Malinga and Jayasuriya and Murali and all these different kinds of players. Ajanta Mendes, Kamindu Mendes. So many different kinds of players who just kind of haven't ever existed before. And that's kind of where they get their strength from. We can find people like on beaches playing with rubber balls who can invent new deliveries that we've never seen before and all this sort of stuff. And through that, what they haven't had is maybe just more normal players, right? Like players who are just very good at cricket in a very normal kind of way. We've had the outliers, we've had the great players like, Aravinda and Chaminda Vas and Kumar and Mahela. And they haven't just had those workhorse type players who are really well respected and known all around the world. And it sort of hit me the other day that is what Dimuth Karunaratne is, right? Everyone else is this mad genius, with a monobrow or, lighting themselves on fire, cutting their ears off in Sri Lankan cricket. And Dimuth Karunaratne is just the guy that makes sure that the lights stay on, right? He's the person who sets the table when no one asks him to. He does all the little jobs to make sure that everything's fine. No one's ever going to remember him. He's got a little clipboard. He's just checking things off as they go. He's doing what Sri Lankan cricket needs. But he's not the sort of player that Sri Lanka is used to hero worshipping, right? There's nothing outlier about him. He's not a freak or a genius or an innovator or anything else. He's just a cricketer who gets the job done over and over again. And maybe once you think about that, you go through all the best players in Sri Lankan history. And of course, there aren't as many because it only starts in the 1980s. But you go through, you've got these tactical geniuses like Arjuna Ranatunga, right? You've got someone like Angelo Matthews, who one way or the other finds the drama and is always much more entertaining than even you would ever imagine he should be. You've got someone like Tilakaratne Dilshan, who can't just play a normal shot. He has to invent his own. All these different people. And it made me think, is Dimuth Karunaratne just Sri Lanka's greatest ever normal cricketer?
Do you want AMAs to connect on live calls with me or engage with our dynamic Discord community? Maybe you want ad-free content, early podcast episodes, or to stay informed through my emailer. Well, if you support us on Patreon, you get all of that plus a little bit of behind the scenes, how the sausage is made stuff. Our deepest thanks go to everyone who has supported us on Patreon so far, but the more people who do means the more content we can make.
The interesting thing about Karunaratne is that he is an opener in an era where we just haven't had many, right? Actually, maybe that's the opposite of the way of putting it. We've actually had quite a lot of people open the batting. Cricket has just been cycling through openers because most teams find an opener, he comes in, he doesn't make any runs, and then he disappears, especially over the back half of Karunaratne's career, right? Like from 2017 to now, being an opener in world cricket is a crazy job, and you have to be Steve Smith to think otherwise. And since the start of his career, the only player who's made more runs than him in that position is David Warner. Like over the last 14 years, it's Warner and Karunaratne have the most runs opening. And yet Warner is this huge figure and everyone talks about him. And you've got the strike rate, the fact he doesn't make runs away from home, all these different narratives around David Warner, not to mention sandpaper and everything else. Karunaratne has almost no narratives around him. He doesn't even average 40 in Test cricket. He averages like a smidge, just the smallest amount, under 40, in an era where most opening batters have struggled to average 30. But then, as I said, it is the second most runs of any opener since the middle of 2011. He's got over 7,000 runs in 100 Test matches with 16 Test centuries. There are only 3 Sri Lankans in the history of the game so far who have more than that amount of centuries. It's a lot of runs. And if anything, the 100s probably underplay him because he wasn't particularly good at converting his 50s to 100s. He also has the 4th most runs for a Sri Lankan cricketer ever. It's a lot of runs for a country that doesn't play a lot of Test matches. I think anyone else playing a 13 to 14 year career might have just made more runs just because of the extra games available to them. And no matter how you think of him as a player, in this era, you kind of think of Warner and Cook and Elgar and maybe Latham. And Karunaratne is in that group. Of the top openers that we think the most about, he's right up there. And he has been for an extraordinarily long time. And it's not as if Sri Lanka have had lots of openers before him. All their success beforehand with their batters have been middle order players. In fact, so much so that quite a few of their best openers are also middle order players. They've just moved up. So Karunaratne has ended up with this incredible career without it being particularly notable or memorable. He's just always been there. In fact, he's always been there so much that there's that incredible photo from 2019, which I think broke cricket Twitter the day it came out, of all the World Cup captains together in, I don't know, a studio with a brick wall behind them and a sofa. And all the players look awkward and out of place, and none of them look comfortable. It is one of cricket's most bizarre photos, and cricket has quite a few bizarre photos. But then Karunaratne's there, and you're like, oh yeah, he played one-day cricket as well. And you can see him in the back of this photo, kind of leaning over, not quite sure of what to do. That's probably because he also wasn't all that much sure of what to do in white ball cricket in general. It's phenomenal for a country that's always been well known at finding number 3, 4, and 5s in ODI cricket that they ended up with Karunaratne as their captain at a World Cup. He's only played like 50 ODI games. He never really made all that many runs, and you're going to be shocked to know he also did it slowly. But again, it's that thing of Karunaratne was always around, even when you didn't notice him. Now, he's obviously not going to go down as a legend. That's not really what the point of this video is. It's more that he was an incredible professional. Like the idea that he could captain at a World Cup because everyone trusted him. He was like a great worker. You knew he was going to turn up every day. You knew he was going to try very hard. He was very smart with the way he played. No one ever looked at Karunaratne and went, oh, what an incredible talent he is. He's going to make all these runs. He had the grift and grind and stay in all the way to do what he did. And all things considered, like, it would have been very hard to find anyone at the start of his career going, this is a person who's going to play 100 tests. He was constantly searching for something, and it was probably just like the next runs, right? But his way of staying ahead of the curve, knowing that he wasn't the most talented player, and he had this incredible thirst for knowledge that made him a much better player than probably what we originally saw when he was coming through. Like, how many years into Karunaratne's career did it take for you to even notice him, right? And none of that bothered him. He was just there doing the work day after day. When it comes to Sri Lankan cricket, banning players for life and then bringing them back 5 minutes later, power struggles within the board, within the government, captaincy changes, coaching changes, all this stuff. What was Karunaratne during all that? He was the adult in the room. He was a professional, even when they weren't always paying their players on time and things like that. He would work on his game, even when a coach wasn't there, cracking the whip behind him. He was the exact kind of player that Sri Lanka needs, right? Just someone who will do the job, be an adult, try really hard, and get better every single game. How many times do we hear Sri Lankan fans say they have these young players with endless talent when they're young, and when they're 27, 28, they're still not fully developed? Karunaratne, that just wasn't what we ever thought about him. He was a player who was constantly trying to maximize his talent. It just wasn't at the level of other people. I think when we had a meeting about, what kind of videos we'd be making over the next few weeks, and we knew that Karunaratne might retire, and I don't think he had at that stage, but I think we knew that he was most likely going to retire at the end of the series. There was that thing of we put it on our list of this is a video to do. But the thing with a player like Karunaratne is that you kind of just move it down, right? And then you go, oh, but now we've got some Champions Trophy stuff. And, McCullum's taken over the white ball team. We want to have a look at that. No one plays ODI cricket anymore. And we've got these, Smith versus Sachin. And, Karunaratne just keeps getting pushed down. And it got to the point where we weren't actually going to be making a video on him at all. And then I realized just how silly that was, because that's what this channel is about, right? Players like Karunaratne is the kind of reason that I love cricket. He's a player who just loves this sport. And because of that, he spent every day of his professional career trying to get a little bit better at it. No one ever thought he was a star, probably even himself included. He was a very low ceiling player, but he built himself into having a very high floor, effective, doing a job, filling in for spots in his country that other people couldn't actually do. He's the exact kind of cricketer that I think cricket fans should love. And I understand why your eye is going to be drawn to AB de Villiers, right? Or Jasprit Bumrah. I get that from an aesthetical point of view. But just from a humanity point of view, Karunaratne is a lot more like the rest of us. He's just a guy who had to work really, really hard for the small spoils that he got. In a cricket team that was often crumbling and falling down, he just put his head down and did the work. I mean, he's obviously not a superhero in this incredible culture that Sri Lankan cricket has managed, of people inventing shots, deliveries, styles of bowling that we've never seen before. It's whole new roles, and, changing the way ODI cricket is played and changing the way that deliveries are bowled and all these sorts of things. Dimuth Karunaratne doesn't fit into any of that, right? He was just a player who was very good at cricket. A lot of those other guys, they're superheroes. Whereas you think about him, he's an everyday hero. And I do mean that really quite literally. For a decade and a half, he just turned up and made runs. And he did it in the most diligent, eager, respectful way, right? He just slapped the ball through point occasionally and turned the balls off his pads. He leant over that bat for like a decade and a half and just tried to make as many runs as he can. If we can't honor that in cricket, what are we even doing? Well played.
South Africa did not choke. In 1906, South Africa needed 284 to win. They'd only passed 100 in half their test innings at that point. At 105 for 6, it seemed impossible. They fought back but lost another flurry, leaving 45 to win with 1 wicket in hand. At the crease was Dave Norse, who was a capable batter, and he was joined by Percy Sherwell, the only debutant captain keeper and number 11 in Test cricket history. And these two were doing it. A huge crowd in South Africa cheered on every single run. With 8 left, Sherwell edged between slips for 4. Straight after, Norse ran a 3. England bowled 3 dots. All they needed was 1 wicket to tie. Instead, a leg side full toss, boundary, game over. This was Test cricket's first 1-wicket win, and the last partnership was a record for almost 100 years. But it was also something else. This was the first Test match that South Africa had ever won. Buy my book on Amazon, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire.